And before we start, I am going to encourage you guys, all of the guests, attendees, to leave all of your questions on the chat as we go. If there is anything that you'd like answered on the Q&A portion at the very end, as we speak, as the authors talk about their books and their tips and their tricks, you can leave all of that in the Zoom chat and we'll be looking at them as we go. But again, this is all about writing YA contemporaries, and it's time for our guests today to introduce themselves. So I'd like to know a little bit about who you are, your releases with Sourcebooks Fire, and an elevator pitch about your latest release. So we're going to start with Kata, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Kale Walther. I'm the author of last year's boarding school novel, If We Were Us. And this spring is my baby, The Summer of Broken Rules. I'm just madly, madly in love with it. In a nutshell, I write coming of age novels with plenty of heart, humor, dash of romance, and relatability. Many of my scenarios have either happened to me, my friend's ex-boyfriend's sister sometimes. So I think there's also some real authenticity weaved into my books. The Summer of Broken Rules. It's set over 1 week in July and follows 18-year-old Meredith Fox as she and her parents travel to their favorite place on the planet, Martha's Vineyard, which is an island off the coast of Massachusetts. Her cousin is getting married. It's the social event of the season, and they wouldn't miss it for anything. But against this backdrop of this big, beautiful, fun wedding, which of course features Meredith's quirky but oh so lovable family, she's grappling with grief over her sister's recent death. But she's also trying to make her sister proud by winning her family's annual ultra-competitive, probably way too competitive game of Assassin. That proves a little more difficult than Meredith originally thought, when she has to start juggling the attentions of a very cute, very witty groomsman who just so happens to be her target. One of my recent readers described this book as like listening to a whole Taylor Swift album while sunning herself on the beach, and I don't think there's anything bad about that.
There really is nothing bad about that. It's honestly the perfect pitch. And if that doesn't make you want to read it, I honestly don't know what will. So I absolutely love that. And now, Robin, you're next on my screen. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Robin Reul, and I am the author of Where the Road Leads Us and My Kind of Crazy. And they are both contemporary novels, and pretty much I write stories that are kind of straddling that line of humor and heartbreak about human connection. I tend to be really drawn to quirky characters and kind of everyday settings where people really kind of help each other find the light in the darkness and move through issues, but trying to keep it light and humorous and also relatable in that way. And so Where the Road Leads Us, my most recent one, My Kind of Crazy came out in 2016. This just came out on April 6th. And it is the story of two teens who had previously been in a class together. They didn't really know each other very well, and just serendipitously find themselves in a ride share on grad night, and end up on an unexpected road trip adventure to take charge of their destinies. They're both at kind of a personal crossroads and have some big decisions to make. So it's actually like a really funny story of these two teens that are dealing with some really serious themes, but they find a way to kind of go from feeling like they don't know what to do and where life's leading them to kind of having hope and possibility and options. So that's my newest.
I love that. That's honestly the perfect way to end it. Hope and possibilities. Like, what more could you want, right? I love that. Sarah, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name's Sarah Van Name. Name is indeed part of my name. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I'm the author of The Goodbye Summer from 2019 and Any Place But Here, which just came out a few weeks ago. when people ask what I write, I kind of flippantly say I write books about sad teen girls, but they are hopefully not sad all the time. And I try to deal with themes of friendship, family, thinking especially about those like really intense best friendships that drive so many of the emotions of your teen years. So Any Place But Here is the story of a girl who gets caught drinking at a school dance with her best friend and gets sent away to live with her grandmother and go to school at the boarding school where her grandmother works. So the story is centered on her relationship with her best friend, which is maybe not platonic and maybe not healthy. Her relationships with her family, with her new friends, her coming to terms with her sexuality, and figuring out what she wants her future to look like. All kind of told through the lens of this film photography class she's taking, which is helping her see the world in a new way.
I love that. Honestly, as a moderator, I'm just hearing these and I'm just like, wow, you guys are so good at pitching your books. Like I just want to reread them all the time. I love that so much. Suzanne, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Park. I'm a Korean American author of YA Contemporaries 2. Mine focus on mostly part coming of age stories with part love stories. So this book came out last year. It's called The Perfect Escape. It's a zombie themed romantic comedy. And the book that's coming out this year is Sunny Song Will Never Be Famous. It's coming out in two and a half, maybe 3 weeks, pretty soon. And that is about a Korean American teenager who's a social media influencer, and she is sent off to digital detox camp in Iowa. And once she's there, she has to disconnect, and she's surprised by all of the new things she's discovered and relationships she's formed when she's forced to disconnect. So that comes out on June 1st.
Love that. I remember reading the synopsis for Sunny Song a while back, and just the back says her next goal is to reach 100,000 subscribers, and I instantly started cracking up. It was I cannot wait to finish it. I am reading it right now, and like Sarah said before we started, it's genuinely so funny. So it's a great time. But yes, thank you all for introducing yourself and giving your elevator pitches. I honestly just encourage everyone to, if you have not yet picked up these books, to do so, because they are literally, like, when I tell you I have not busied myself with anything else but reading lately, reading some of these books, have to finish some of these books, they are literally incredible. And I don't say that very lightly. So you guys really need to, like we say, you need to get on that. You need to get on that. So we're gonna move on to the writing tips and tricks, which is what we're all here for. We'd like to pick a little bit at the brains of these authors and see exactly what goes in that creative process. So I guess the first one, which is what a lot of people wonder when they are attempting to write, or maybe when they're doing their first draft of anything, is how do you find inspiration when you are writing? Where does it come from? And how do you start, I guess? Kata?
Okay. So I get it's a cliche, but I am definitely a subscriber to write what you know. And I know my family, we genuinely love laughing together. We sit at the dinner table long after we finished our food. So I definitely get inspiration from my experiences, but even just a funny story my parents tell. The Summer of Broken Rules has a ton of my dad in it from a wedding he attended, his best friend's wedding, actually. And then I also draw inspiration from music. If you read The Summer of Broken Rules, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'll be in the car with my sister and listening to a certain song, and then it'll change and I'll hit pause and I'm like, so this is what happens in this song. This is the backstory. And she loves it, but also gets really annoyed. She's like, stop writing books while we're listening to my playlist. So it's really family memories and songs for me.
Robin?
So for me, it's sort of a melting pot. I mean, it can be drawn from anything from like just a conversation I'm having with somebody and something that's said, and it's just, I go down a rabbit hole of, oh my God, you know, that would be an incredible story. It could be a headline that I'm reading, like, you know, boy walks out of woods, you know, and is seen for the first time in 12 years. And it's like, what do we do with that, you know? So it's kind of a melting pot of just information and just kind of running with something, just a spark of something that comes from real life. But what can I spin on that makes it interesting and different and fun?
Sarah?
I think for me, when I want to start something new and I don't already have an idea in my head, it's about going to somewhere new. Obviously, vacations are amazing, and not always possible, particularly this past year. Even just a park or a friend's house, obviously coffee shops once we can go to those again. Just something to change the sensory experience I'm having outside of my computer, because you know, almost every day I just sit on my couch and write and everything around me is the same. But being someplace new in that writing mindset, I've found can help spark something unexpected.
Suzanne?
In general, when I'm just not really having any ideas, I usually just try to read pretty broadly. And then I also, I like to take long walks, and usually that just clears my mind. But in other cases, like for this particular book, Sunny Song, I was actually researching a different book. And that was for my adult book about the gaming industry. And there are these gaming detox camps that I was reading about in Korea and Japan and China. And I was just amazed that there's this whole industry based on that. And then that got me like researching, I wonder if they have anything like that here. Then I saw that they have detox camps here for adults, but it's mostly to decompress and get away from work. And then that led me to thinking, well, what if they had that for teenagers here? And what would that look like? And that's how I ended up with this concept. So it just was going down one avenue and then kind of opening up other doors.
That's awesome though. So basically, read about stuff that might be a little bit weird, but may give you a new idea, and then staying in the moment, maybe going outside, write what you know. I love all of that, because I think all of that basically sums up to just live in the moment, be in the now, and just be aware of your surroundings, I guess, and what is happening around you. Because I think all of us can agree, I don't know if you guys can agree, but I mean, at the end, writing is the truth. You're writing what you see, what you hear, what you know. So I love all of that. That is genuinely incredible. So I think the perfect kind of segue, I guess, into the next question, knowing now about the, rehab camps, I guess you could call them, about gamers and all of that, is how do you, with that inspiration, figure out how to craft a killer plot? How do you work them hand in hand?
My favorite question. Okay. So like Suzanne, I guess I go on long walks, or I go on runs, and by runs, I mean slow jogs, and really think about it. Sometimes I am lucky enough to dream a plot, but not often. So once I think of something, I then really soundboard the hell out of my sister and my best friend to see if it's intriguing or makes sense. And once they kind of give me the okay, I write a really long synopsis-like thing to my agent. And I always apologize, and she always says it's okay because she loves this stuff. But ultimately, it's her opinion that matters to me the most. And if she likes where it's going, then I hit chapter 1 and away we go.
Robin, anything similar, anything different?
A little different. And for me, I kind of approach plot from a really weird angle, because the way stories come to me, they just sort of download visually to me, almost like a movie. So I very often will see characters and scenes and setting and not necessarily know where they fit in the story. But because that's how it comes to me, I sort of start with who these characters are and figure out what it is that they want. or what's missing for them, what they think that they want. And then I can kind of figure out where I want them to go by the end, where I'd like them to be. And so when I look at it from that, combined with figuring out what would be the best setting to put them in, the plot sort of unfolds as a secondary aspect of figuring out who those characters are and where this is going to be set. So I don't know that it is definitely the part I struggle with the most, because I have to figure it out afterwards. That it would be so much easier in some ways if that came first, but it's more for me an evolution of character and setting, and figuring out what will challenge them the most.
Love that. So it's kind of a result of the character.
Yeah.
Love that. Sarah?
I take something of a similar approach to Robin, in that I typically will have an idea of what I want the overall emotional arc to be, where the character is going to be at the beginning and where they're going to be at the end. But I've found that outlining a plot based on those things really, really helps me. As soon as I can sort of envision the beginning, the end, and some middle point, just getting in a Word doc and blocking out different chapters, I think really helps me figure out where, like, how we're going to get to the place we need to be. I find it very frustrating and very difficult. But it kind of front loads my writing angst, because I have like a terrible month of plotting where I'm angry all the time. And then, you know, a year of like kind of executing this plot that I spent all that front time figuring out. So difficult, but it helps me a lot.
What about you, Suzanne?
I'm not really much of a plotter or somebody that just kind of goes in blindly and just starts typing. So I'm kind of in the middle. What I typically like to do is to make sure that I have certain key elements of the story figured out. So I have the inciting incident, a midpoint reversal, a climax, a dark moment, and don't usually have the ending figured out. It's always a surprise to me. So I usually have to have those things before I start the story. And then when I start writing, I try to make sure that those points hit at the right times in the story. And then when I'm actually drafting, I just have to make sure that the scenes and chapters do something to propel the story forward. When I was starting out, I kind of just wrote scenes because they were funny, or wrote scenes because they were because I just wanted to write them. And then I realized they didn't actually fit in the story at all, or they didn't really do anything to help the character figure anything out, or didn't like move the story in any way. So I'd have to delete them. So I've learned that now over time. And that's something that I think I'm better at, just having written more.
It's curious that you guys talk so much about characters. Like, obviously the characters are part of, like, the biggest part of the story, really, besides the plot. So with characters specifically, how do you nail or write that realistic dialogue that makes these characters come across as just real people that you'd see on the everyday walk of life? Kata?
So I read, dialogue is my absolute, by far, favorite thing to write. I'm in my young 20s, so I'm not exactly too far out of the teenage college world. So I guess I'm still kind of have that lingo going, and I have younger siblings. So I hear them talk all the time. And if I'm not sure about something, I shoot it to my sister and I'm like, is this what a, 18-year-old would say? And she usually says yes. So I'm proud of myself. But I also read and watch a lot of movies. I know Leigh Bardugo and Cassandra Clare write fantasy, but their banter is still amazing. And then particularly with movies, I love the screenwriter Richard Curtis, like Notting Hill, 4 Weddings and a Funeral. I love his style. So read, watch movies, and have your sister okay things.
So now you know, if you don't have a sister, you need to get a sister.
Yes.
However that works, you need to get yourself a sister.
Yeah.
Robin.
So for me, I think one of the biggest things actually is just eavesdropping, like literally plopping yourself down at a Starbucks and pretending that you're reading something, but you're actually just listening to the teenagers at the table next to you talking. I think that, I mean, that's a huge part, as are reading and movies for me too. I really love romantic comedies, and I'm a big fan of like Richard Linklater and John Hughes. And I really do try and play up the dialogue in mine. That's totally my jam too. That's where I feel like I really enjoy the opportunity to develop a character's unique voice. So as far as nailing that realistic dialogue, I think that's there's a couple of things. One is that when you're writing it, I think you really need to be able to take away the characters' names. And when you're reading it out loud, that you can really distinguish and tell who's talking so that they really are different. That's key, because if they all sound the same, you haven't nailed your dialogue, no matter how witty and filled with great banter. The other is to be really careful about how much current jargon that you're putting into something, because what people say today, they may not be saying tomorrow, and it may completely date your manuscript and also make it really obvious that perhaps an adult has written it. And teenagers are really smart, and they really want to trust in that main character. And just being careful of the length of time that someone talks. I really find it helps when you read it out loud, what you've written in your dialogue, because other than me going on right now in a monologue, most people don't necessarily in a conversation with each other. And that quick exchange of back and forth is what helps your pacing and moving things forward. So every line should be weighed against whether or not it actually is moving that story forward or that character development forward.
I don't know if I'm the only one who would love to know what the eavesdropping looks like. Like, I can just imagine Robin sitting down at a cafe being like, so what are they saying? What am I going to read next?
both my kids were in marching band, and the greatest gift in the world was the 2-hour bus ride to competitions filled with 100 band kids behind me. So that was a gift. Thank you. A lot of things may have ended up in there. Who knows?
We'll never know. We'll never know.
She's never going to tell.
I know. What about you, Sarah?
I find that every kind of group of people, whether that's a family or a really tight-knit group of friends, or even just a pair of friends, over time develops their own kind of rhythms and ways of speaking and words and phrases that they rely on that are unique to them. And so when I start, I start with the way I speak with my friends or the way I speak with my family. And then I try to evolve that into something that is unique to the characters that I am writing. So I might have to, once I've finished a book, go back and kind of do some editing on the dialogue early to get those rhythms right. But what I'm looking for is not something that is sort of like generically teenage in nature, but something that is particular to these 2 people or these 5 people, and feels uniquely theirs.
I love that. So more about the dynamic, I guess, between characters and how they bounce off each other.
Yeah, I think so.
Suzanne?
Everyone gave good answers. What everyone else said. Also, I think when I try to come up with characters, whether they're the adults in the books or the teens or other younger kids in any book, I try to make sure that their life context makes sense and is reflected accurately in how they are, come across in dialogue and in voice. So I don't want to make them sound like, they know everything about the world and world politics or something if they're, 13 years old. And so, or also make them sound too young when it's actually somebody that should be, 18 or 17 and have experienced certain life events. And it all depends on the family situation and like where people are from, things like that also come into play. And then I think one thing I try to stay away from, and I think some people joke about this, but it's like YA is not just throwing in pop culture and jargon. And I think I just try my best to stay away from those things because I know that that's like a pitfall. And I try to make sure that I can work around that and the book stands on its own without having needed any of that.
Awesome. And I mean, we all know that dialogue is also a great way to move the story along. So with that, I guess, again, with the whole thing about moving the story along, character development, which we all know, we all love to see it. We love to see how their relationships evolve, how they find out the truth of the world, how they, fall, stand back up, and they overcome all of their obstacles. How do you guys nail your character development? Or I guess, how do you figure out where you want your character to go? Or does that just happen naturally as you write?
So I keep these crazy notebooks that nobody is allowed to read but me. And I guess I start with kind of a mind map of, in the Summer of Broken Rules, Meredith at the beginning, her problems, just her character. I'm like losing my train of thought, sorry. And then I jump and do the same thing at the end and what she's like. And then I have certain scenes in mind, so I kind of put them in the middle and write in parentheses what she's supposed to learn from each. But she does develop organically. I do develop a lot of things organically, but so I keep kind of a skeleton structure. But as I write, things come to mind naturally. That was so all over the place, and I'm sorry.
I mean, honestly, like these characters just come to life by themselves. You just have to put on the page whatever they want you to say. So yeah. It's natural for the process to be a little bit chaotic. I wouldn't expect anything different. Robin?
So I completely agree with that. I mean, we can start out developing our characters with the best of intentions, but I find that they talk back and they're like, no, I'm not going over there. I'm actually going to go over here. And so very often I find out what my characters are going to actually do, like when they do it. Because I'm totally a pantser. I don't plot things out. So things really do happen and I'm discovering it kind of as the reader does. That being said, when I try and develop a character, I think about them in all aspects, right down to like, what are the shoes look like that they're wearing? What are their clothes like? What's their hair like all the visuals. And then I break it down that I think we all present ourselves to the world one way, and then who we are in our brains and what our own self-narrative is something usually very different. So that gives a really rich opportunity to take that character and think about them from that way. And like what are they ashamed of? What are they passionate about? What are they hiding? What do they want people to believe? Because then we know that who they are at the beginning of the story and who they're going to be by the end of it, there's something in there that they're going to need to unpack. And so then I have to think about, well, what or who will be the situation or person that will most challenge them to have to do that. So that's really what I do. I treat them like a piece of luggage that's getting unpacked to move them forward.
I love that. What about Sarah? Where does the sad teenage girl come from?
I think something that I'm really interested in writing and in reading too is memories, like how our memories shape us. I mean, how our experiences shape us, of course, and then how the way we remember things changes over time. And so especially at the beginning of the book, I spend a lot of time writing characters' memories, kind of as they run into a situation, kind of pausing, remembering something in the past. And I keep a good bit of that in the final book, but I also trash a ton of it, which is fine because anything that helps me get to know the character or helps me understand the motivation behind something they're doing, that's not wasted work, even if it doesn't end up in the final book. And it's writing that I tend to really enjoy because I think writing about memory is so fascinating.
I love that. I love that bit. I think usually people feel bad about leaving stuff out because they're like, it's my baby. I wrote this. I don't want to leave anything out. But I love that bit about owning up to it and just realizing that that makes you know the character a little bit better, but it doesn't necessarily, I guess, serve the overall story arc. I love that. That's really encouraging in writing. Suzanne, what about you?
For my main character or main characters, if it's a romantic comedy, I try to figure out what their misbeliefs are. And that's a kind of a thing that a story, what do you consultant, Lisa Crone is sort of known for. And that idea is that the character believes something about the world that turns out to not be true for that character. So throughout the book, you see this character go on this journey and change over time. And it could be like money doesn't buy you happiness. It could be that you actually, it doesn't show weakness when you ask for help, things like that, that show how the character grows and changes throughout the book. And that has helped me a lot. Sometimes I actually go in there thinking I have this idea for a misbelief and start writing and I find a different one. And then I'm like, well, that one's stronger, or that one is easier to write to, or this one is just more believable for this character. And then I end up kind of going back and seeing if I need to change anything. And that's actually happening in my current story. I actually started, and maybe they can have two misbeliefs, who knows, we'll find out. But in the end, I just make sure that they go on this journey. Maybe the other main character has it too, and then make sure that the other characters also can, help these characters find their way.
That. I honestly love these answers. I really do feel like it's incredibly encouraging for people who sometimes go into the writing process and come at a standstill and I just don't know what to do anymore. Like, I just don't know how to keep pushing through. So I love that these answers are like, just let it be as it comes. You'll figure it out as you go. Like, it's not an absolute thing as you write. I love that. And so I think as the final question before we jump into the Q&A, which you guys can start dropping your questions on the Zoom chat, but I guess the final way to question is, how do you keep your writing momentum going? Because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this as they start. I guess the most difficult part would be the first draft. How do you keep that going?
My answer is just, my family doesn't love it, but I just really try to immerse myself in the world, whether that is, again, taking runs or slow jogs while listening to these insane playlists I've made that I think describe the story. In a manuscript I wrote this fall, I was always listening to this one playlist. And with the pandemic, it was really easy to just be totally on the wrong calendar. I think my mother was talking about Thanksgiving plans at one point, and I was like, what do you mean it's not November? It's June. We're graduating high school in 10 days. So I have to really work on my calendar keeping. But I always try to have a part of my brain still in the book.
Robin?
So for me, I keep things going by continuing to either read things that are within the same genre that I'm writing about, so that not only am I sort of keeping in that mode of where I am in the same kind of topics, but to make sure I'm not copying something somebody else has already written. Because the worst feeling in the world is coming up with like the perfect ending, a great idea, and then finding out somebody has already written it. That happened to me with the John Green book. It was like, oh, guess I can't do that. It was for my first book, actually. And it was, yeah. So I like to know what else is out there because it gets me thinking deeper about what I'm writing. And I also love going down research rabbit holes for things that are little sidebars that just enrich the writing when I get to that scene, like in Where the Road Leads Us. He's big on pinball and he goes to a pinball museum. And so I had so much fun going down the road of learning all about pinball and like all these different fun pinball statistics and what games are popular and what they did with the back glass on, this particular game and all that. So as long as I'm doing something that's still in service of the novel, even if I'm not actually writing it, I still feel like I'm in it and it keeps it going.
Sarah?
My answer's boring and it won't work for everyone, but just write every day. You know, I have a word count and it's super low. It's 100 words. I write 100 words every day. It's a little short paragraph. But that was my New Year's resolution in 2014, and it's the only New Year's resolution that I ever kept. But it turns out if you write 100 words every day, you know, you eventually get to a book or a short story or an essay. If I don't have a current project, sometimes I'll write a memory of my own, or I'll write a little personal essay, or just start a short story that might only get 500 words in. But I find that if I stay in the habit of it, eventually all of that turns into, you know, something that becomes a longer piece.
I mean, honestly, some people say 1,000 words a day. So 100 words a day is much
Just
more
100.
and less intimidating. I'm more likely to write 100 words a day. It's easy enough. You text
Yeah,
a few words a day.
just a few sentences, yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Suzanne?
I'm sort of where Sarah is, but I'm on contract and I have a really tight deadline. So mine is 1,000 words. Thank you for making me cry. No,
I'm so jealous. I'm so impressed.
it's not good words. Let me clarify.
I don't believe that for 1 second.
It's like a big block of dialogue, like 90% of it, and 10%, oh, I should add like the characters, you know, where they are, the setting, and then I'll go back and I'll fix it. So I actually, funny enough, I do that. And then at the end I say, oh, here are the things I know I have to fix. And then that laundry list, the to-do list at the end of the manuscript has gotten bigger, but it's still part of my word count because I know I have to go back and use it as like a strategic thing to fix. Anyway, I'm digressing. What I try to do is what Sarah has said is just keep kind of a consistent daily word count goal. And I don't beat myself up if I don't hit it. So I, you know, sometimes can make it up on the weekend. If not, I try not to just worry about it because if I try to do that, then I get stressed out. So I, you know, just try to keep realistic goals. And then I always make sure that I reward myself for hitting those milestones because especially anything in publishing, you'll see so many ups and downs that every little win really matters. So when I hit a certain word count goal, when I'm halfway done, I celebrate somehow, like go, you know, have a nice dinner or something, or, you know, get myself a Frappuccino or whatever. And then when I finish the draft is when all the partying happens. And then I have to go back and actually do the hard work of fixing all of the messed up sentences and things. But I think that that really has helped me kind of push forward.
I mean, but there's some valuable insight in there as well, like even having the whole dialogue first and then filling in the little lines with the description. I know some people feel like their strong suit is rather the dialogue rather than the description. So I think it's also helpful to know that even if the process is a little bit, I guess, backwards or not the norm, it's still okay. It still gets the job done. So I love that. But now it's it's time for the juicy stuff, apparently. We have some questions in the chat. I hope you guys are ready to just answer some on the whim. And I'm seeing some good ones. So the first one that I'm seeing is from Caitlin, and Caitlin asks, how do you write from real experience without getting bogged down in the details? How do you let your imagination just take the real stuff and run with it? A moment of silence.
Do you want us to go around, or do you just like want free fall jump in?
If you guys want to free fall jump in and jump off each other, you guys can do however you want to do. I don't know who wants to start.
What was the question again?
How do you write from real experience without getting bogged down in the details?
It's hard. I mean, there's my 2 cents. It's hard because it's really hard to give yourself permission to write something differently than it happened if it really happened. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is to remind myself that I don't have to write it exactly as it happened. In fact, it gives me the opportunity to write it the way I wanted it, or to write it more interesting than it happened. Because you'll very often hear that writers will argue, but no, this really happened because this happened to my sister and blah, 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 blah. Doesn't mean it necessarily is what works best for a story. So just giving yourself permission that you don't have to adhere to those details.
Yeah, I agree. I keep talking about using the summer broken rules as an example, but yes, there are little stories in there that I have tweaked from real experience because it works better for the story or it's more entertaining. And I also write characters who aren't like me at all. So that makes a big difference. Like the way Meredith is, she loves Martha's Vineyard, and of course I love Martha's Vineyard, but other than that, we are not similar at all. I always use I talk about my sister all the time. My sister is my muse. I always think of what my sister would do first and then tweak that as well.
Again, you need to get yourself sisters.
I know, you need a sister.
You need a sister.
I know.
Susan,
gonna be so embarrassed.
Rent herself out.
Not right. Could you imagine?
Rent a muse.
Everyone who wants to become an author just rents a sister somewhere. Oh my God, Suzanne, Sarah, what about you guys?
You know, both of those answers were great. For me, it's just making sure, like, so first of all, when I do dialogue in certain scenes, I know later on I might cut it because it's just what I need to get on the page. And that's okay to get just the things on the page, but you have to really think, like, does the scene and this chapter move the story forward in the end? Does it propel you into the next thing? And so that's usually how I go back and I read it. And then you'll have critique partners, hopefully, other people who will read it, and they'll tell you where the slow points are, or parts that kind of trip people up or, you know, aren't needed. If you have a really good critique partner, they usually kind of help you know what areas that need some work. And so that's how I've kind of managed through that part.
I think for me, like, at the beginning of a story, I always try to be pretty intentional and specific with myself in saying, how is this character different from me and how are they the same? You know, what do we share, and how do I want this person to be really, really different? And so I think when I'm thinking about my own experiences, it's easier with that baseline to be like, okay, if someone who, you know, if this character is much braver than I am in real life, so they would react to this differently, or this character is like really, really, really unself-aware, and I'm like, I would say a normal amount of self-aware. Hopefully, you know, it's kind of a trick question. But kind of taking either the kind of the base of the experience I've had and mapping out a different reaction from there, or just taking, you know, sometimes I do let myself get bogged down in the details and just pull like little tiny bits and pieces of memories or sensory experiences and toss those in, which I feel helps make things more real.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin, for sending over your question. And I hope that it was answered in a way that was, you know, satisfactory to you. We have a question from Olivia as well. What are your strategies for getting unstuck, specifically on a plot point, or blanking on a plot point you know you need?
Oh, geez. I beg my brain to just give me the answer right away. I beg and beg and beg. And when it does not, I just step away from it for a little bit, for a few hours, maybe a day, maybe a couple of days, depending on my schedule. And then sometimes I soundboard off my sister or friends of mine. Like, I explain the situation, I don't know what to do. My best friend has been a savior for me recently because she, you know, takes the time and is like, well, how about this? Or she'll play devil's advocate. And I usually find the answer through that.
I will sometimes, I mean, I advocate stepping away completely too, because I think sometimes that distance and then revisiting and reading it, when you're reading it, you naturally, your brain will go to where it wants to go next, at least for me. But that's where I also dive in again with reading and watching movies and things like that that are in that genre, because sometimes it sparks an idea. it can be just something that, you know, you riff off of that it brings you in a new direction that you hadn't thought of before. But I also 100% agree, taking that step back and giving that distance sometimes brings that clarity.
I agree that taking a step back sometimes helps. And again, going on the walks and listening to music and doing other things sometimes just reboots your brain. But I wrote actually The Perfect Escape out of order, not intentionally, because I didn't know it was going to turn into the book it did, but I was taking a workshop class where the instructor was just focusing on certain things about a story or things about a character. And I believe like the first scene I wrote about that was show a scene where your main character is heroic. And that was like an assignment for the class. So the actual story, part of the story that I turned in was kind of in the second half of the book. And it was like the first moment that they go on this survival competition and they embark on their journey. And I remember thinking, well, you know, I have that part figured out. First half of the book, but it worked for me for that book. So it may not necessarily mean you have to write linearly. You might just be able to write what you know is certain scenes you know you'll get out of the book, and that might help jog other ideas.
I think for me, I'm sure this is not true for everyone, but if I'm thinking about a book linearly and I don't know the ending yet and I don't know what happens next, and I spend a few weeks, you know, sitting down doing my 100 words, seeing what comes out of that, and nothing is feeling interesting to me, then that's probably not a project that I am going to continue. And maybe it'll come back to it later, but I just start on something new. And then if there's something where I do know the ending, but I don't know how to get there, yeah, I mean, I think what Robin and Kata said about just talking to other people, getting feedback, and then Suzanne, what you said about writing out of order, I think it's really cool when people can do that. I have a block in my brain. I can't. But I do kind of tend to know what the ending is going to be in broad strokes and kind of trying to work back from there and then meet in the middle wherever this kind of block point is happening.
Yeah, and I think this is, again, the perfect segue to the next question, because Suzanne mentioned critique partners and again, the feedback thing. At what point of drafting do you guys have a beta reader or a critique partner? Like, when does that come in?
I send my best friend chapters as soon as I finish them. Maybe that's because I just need validation right away. But she's my sister is busy at college. So yeah, I send my best friend chapters as soon as I finish them or the next day after I've read it again. But she likes it chapter by chapter. So that's what I do. I have other beta readers who don't get it until it's a full manuscript.
With my first book, I sent it to lots of different beta readers along the way in each of the different drafts and the different chapters and got all kinds of input. But with this particular book, I didn't let anyone read it except my editor and my agent until it was completely finished, because I actually didn't want anyone in my head, because everybody's going to have different opinions. And that worked for me with this book because I just needed to get this book out of me. So it depends, I think, on the nature of what you're writing, how deadline driven, how personal the story is, all of those things, how much you want to let anybody else in your head with feedback. This was pretty unusual for me not to let a single soul, not even my husband, read a chapter, nothing, until it was ready and had gone through the first line of, okay, this works, this is going to be a book.
For my latest book, I had a couple different people to kind of pull in. I have a writers group, and they look at the big picture, the introduction, like the start of the book, and kind of help me make sure that it's interesting enough to, like, the first 10 pages. And then certain key scenes, they also kind of help me with that if it's, we meet monthly. And then I have another critique partner who we go way back, so we can send each other garbage and we will we'll kind of be okay with that. And then we, work through it, and it's very early draft. But then I have also, if I need it, beta readers too, that just read the whole thing, if there's time. But lately I've just been in time crunches. So sometimes they only get like a 50-page chunk, and then I ask for feedback. Is anything slowing them down or tripping them up? Anything major, and that's what they're looking for. So they're kind of looking for different things.
I don't let anyone read anything until it's all done. Just write the whole thing and then one edit pass, because like you, Suzanne, I have kind of a running list of things that I know I'll need to fix as I'm writing. So kind of do like, a copy edit and then like fix the biggest stuff. And then after all that, I give it to my agent and my husband. And if they like it, which my husband is I think he would not be upset about saying this, a fairly uncritical reader, which is amazing. Love to have an uncritical reader on my side. He loves my books, and many other books. And then my agent is a great critical reader. So having both of those impressions, if they both are, interested in it, then I will get other beta readers later for editing, but not until the first whole draft is finished.
Hope that was useful to Doriela, who asked the question. And the next question we have is about the famous info dump, which we all are either familiar with, have experienced. So when writing a character's memory, how do you integrate that organically? Like not just making it seem like an info dump about the past.
I do it through dialogue a lot. Like I integrate it through exchanges where characters are talking. Like I figure out what that whole info dump is, the information that I need to get through. And then I figure out the key places where that can be peppered throughout in bits of dialogue. It could be literally in a one sentence throwback memory. And so that it kind of builds so that it's very organic. I mean, there's some places where you can't help but have a little bit, it needs it, but just to really keep it to the most essential pieces and then find ways to integrate that as somebody's revealing themselves to another character, because then it's both revealing the character development and the plot and the backstory. But I always write a piece of backstory that never makes it in the book, just so that I know where they came from too, and know all the details of that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be anything the reader ever reads.
Yeah, so according to several people, I won't name names, the info dump is one of my overused tendencies, and I need to work on that. But like Robin, I integrate it through dialogue, or if the character is visiting a place that spurs an important memory, then it goes through there. I think those are my two biggest places. But then I go, instead of one line, it's like 3 paragraphs. And then I have to, way shorten it and cut, and it breaks my heart. But
I feel ya.
Yeah.
I agree with both Robin and Keita that it's really been using dialogue for its superpowers is where you can reveal information, not in like a corny sort of way where it's like, as this happened. And then also I've had to make sure that when they do have flashbacks, that it makes sense within the context of what is happening to the character at the time. And I think that is like, and I actually don't use that much info dumping anymore. I used to. And honestly, I'm reading a book right now that is going to be published soon. And it's like pages and pages of somebody's backstory interspersed, but it works for that particular purpose, for that particular character, because they're kind of a reflective character. So I wouldn't say that it's always bad. It might work within how you're writing the story.
Yeah, I think if the character in that moment that you're writing would be remembering something, then I think that's a great place to put in a little bit of that memory. And in terms of editing later, I think it's always worthwhile to me, like going back to something I said earlier, like, is this something that I was writing because I was getting to know my character, I was doing my word count, I was just kind of like getting into the rhythm of the book, or is it something that like is really key to them? And so, you know, cutting those things if they don't matter, but keeping them or moving them around if they are things that, you know, really flesh out that character.
Awesome. Thank you for that question. And the next one is from Destiny, which is, how do you balance the heavier, more sensitive topics with the lighthearted mood?
I feel like this is...
Kata, I feel like you do this really well.
I know, I feel like this is at Kata. Because I wanted to write about a serious topic, but I didn't want to write a downer of a book, especially set it. I'm not lying. Martha's Vineyard is my favorite place. So to balance that, I came up with this ridiculous game of Assassin to, I think, balance it out, to make you laugh even if you want to cry at some point. So I think writing about that, but also writing the sister storyline, I think they balance each other out in some ways. I don't think that was articulated very well, but
now you got to laugh through the tears.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Now you get to laugh through the tears.
Mhm.
What about the rest of you?
I think that's sort of like what I guess has become my accidental brand of sorts, is that I tend to take really serious topics and infuse them with humor, so that they're more like sort of like the serious topics are what's running in the background, and it's just what they're dealing with, and the humor kind of moves to the forefront, and that's where I think the hope comes in. For me, in my real life, I'm kind of like a sarcastic, snarky kind of person, and humor is what gets me through and keeps me laughing, because if I focused on all the different things that have gone on in my life, oh my gosh, it's like, it's overwhelmed. So humor is my way that I approach my own life, and so I think it's found its way into the characters, and it seems to be the piece that resonates with readers, is like, wow, you're dealing with something that's so serious, but I'm laughing. And you've got like assisted suicide and estrangement and emotional abuse, and yet I'm laughing. So I think that it's a key to relatability. If you can connect with somebody and reach them, I think humor is one of those ways that's sort of that universal connector that makes us kind of break down and allow ourselves to be a little more vulnerable and open to connecting with somebody else on a different level. It's an important part to me of writing that story, is making sure that is front and center, actually.
I don't have a good answer to this. I write humorous books with heartfelt undertones. So, and I mean, when I watch movies and read books, the ones that I remember and go back to the most are the ones that made me laugh and made me cry. So what I do want to do in all of my books is just figure out the dials when I start out the book, and to see where the balance is going to be. For the books that came out last year, they're a little bit punchier. They address kind of issues more head on. There's a lot of snark in them. The books that are coming out this year reflect the mood of when I was drafting them, which was during the pandemic, and I wanted comfort reads. And so with those, I had a much lighter tone, a little bit lighter handed humor, and more tender moments. And so I don't know what the right answer to this is, but I do know that it is, you know, part of what I do as an author is trying to figure out what those dials are going to be and make sure that I deliver on that at the end.
I like that answer.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
I was going to ask Kata's sister for some advice after this.
Right.
Make sure I have it right.
I just really try to remember, like, when I think about these big emotional payoffs in books that I love, like, you can't have a big emotional payoff without earning it. And you don't earn melodrama with melodrama. And so you need some sort of everyday stuff, some funny stuff, some lighter stuff, or just some, you know, whatever passes for normalcy for that character to insert, you know, the moments that need to happen to make that big moment at the end of the chapter or the end of the book feel like satisfying. And when I do find myself writing like paragraph after paragraph of like super solemn, serious, dramatic stuff, I mean, A, that's boring, and B, it's not fun to write. And so getting to a moment like that, having earned it, is like so satisfying.
Love that. I think this question's really great because I myself am wondering this too, how kind of like the process of elimination works. What made you guys decide to write YA contemporaries versus any other genre out there?
I am not creative enough to create a fantasy world. I bow down to fantasy authors. I feel like I would come up with like time travel, ... mind goes blank. Like that is it. This is really the only genre I feel like I'm okay at.
I agree. I can't do the world building thing beyond the world that I live in.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we are here in this world, here and now, and the stories that can kind of like help us through and make us feel good and maybe give us new perspective or new hope in our own lives are the kind of stories that I feel compelled to tell. But I have mad respect, just like you, for people that can create whole scenarios and worlds, and it's just not in my wheelhouse. So I'm staying where I feel like I'm good at what I do, in creating things in this universe.
There is world building in contemporaries.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, so it's not that we don't do it. It's more that it's a different world that you need to paint a new picture of. And so I'm just best at painting a picture of a contemporary world versus one that is completely made up and, you know, just something that I don't actually read that many outside of contemporaries that often. I do sometimes, but most of my reading is centered on romantic comedies to romance to mysteries and thrillers and suspense, but not usually going into fantasy. I do read occasionally, but I just feel more comfortable in the contemporary space.
I think that it is really exciting to me writing about teenagers and from teenagers' perspectives, because when you're a teenager, like everything is new, you know, like there's just so much new about the world. There's so much about the future that is exciting and unknown. And I think that is a really cool perspective to inhabit. I also love YA fantasy, but I cannot even fathom keeping track of as many details as it would require to live in a fantasy world. I mean, I've got a little document with like school schedules and like when's the SAT this year, but
I love that.
Like names, you know, forests, I don't know, couldn't do it.
So with that, how do you guys decide which ideas to pursue? Because there's also a million different things that you could do within the contemporary genre. So how do you decide?
Well, I've never been idea girl, but at some point in the pandemic, I've come up with idea after idea after idea, and everyone's like, yes, do it. And I have had such trouble recently picking which idea to pursue. I'll start something, you know, be in love with the first chapter, get bored by chapter 5. So and that's happened twice already, but there's this one manuscript I'm working on that I work on, then stop for a while, and then go back to, and then stop because I get annoyed with the characters. But I came up with a new idea the other day that I am actually really, really excited about. So I think I'm going to pursue that for the time being. The Spotify playlist is done. That's kind of when you know for me that
you've committed.
There's a Spotify playlist. I have the beginnings of a Pinterest board. I think that kind of says, okay, you should work on this one.
Is there Taylor Swift on the playlist?
Maybe. Not like a huge dump, but there are several, you know, songs.
It's a good follow-up to the Summer of Broken Rules. It's a good follow-up.
Well, there's no folklore or Evermore in the Summer of Broken Rules, so I that is on the new playlist. But
we just have to keep up. We got to keep up with the times.
Yeah.
I don't know about the rest of us, Robin.
For me, I mean, because my ideas come to me so odd and fragmented, like I said, just a download of a character or a scene or a line of dialogue or something like that. When something keeps showing up, that's when I kind of think, well, maybe there's something here, and I can start to sit and write something, and maybe I get a couple of pages, and then maybe the next day I get a different couple of pages that might be a different beginning. But when an idea keeps coming back around, then that's when I explore it more deeply. I'm also not an idea girl. I do not have like this long backlist of 100 great ideas. I'm so envious of writers that do. Mm-hmm. So usually it's something that has, you know, going back to finding that inspiration, something I've overheard or something that I've just learned about that I want to learn more about and explore more about, or something that I'm going through myself, and it's like free psychotherapy to like be able to dig deeper and explore this, because if it's something I'm going through, maybe it's something somebody else is going through, and maybe they need that story. And so that's kind of where it's born, when it keeps coming back.
I don't have a good answer to this one either. Just never have good answers. But for coming up with ideas, I usually have an ongoing Google Doc that I just keep on my drive of ideas that I've come up with that have sort of made the cut. Because I'm always in transit or doing something, I usually text myself an idea or email myself an idea, and then it ends up getting later shifted over into the Google Doc. And then at some point when I'm ready for a new project, I take my kind of the ones that speak to me the most, like the top 3 or top 5. And then I kind of do a little kind of brief explanation. And then I run it by my writers group, actually, because it's a pretty good mix of different personalities in that group. And sometimes they like them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I ignore them, sometimes I listen to them, but it's good to just have a sounding board. So sometimes they go, you know, what would be better is if you did X, Y, or Z, or have you thought about this and this and that? That would be a problem. And it just really helps me shape which ones I end up pursuing.
I also don't have a lot of ideas. I just try starting to write and seeing how I feel about something. And I'll usually know by like 5 or 10,000 words into something new if it, you know, has enough that it could become a whole book, or if I need to set it aside. So I also am so envious of people who have, you know, a billion ideas swimming around in their head at once. I feel like I write a book, I edit it, I feel great about it, and then I'm like completely drained until I can come up with something else.
Yeah, I think this next one is a little bit simple, but I guess a lot of people may have this question. What platform do you use for writing your drafts? Is it Google Docs? Is it Microsoft Word? Is it Scrivener? Are there any particular programs that you use? I know it's a simple question, but I know everybody has like different ways to do it. Or maybe you write it by hand. We don't know.
I use Word, and that's mostly just because I really don't know how to use anything else. I'm just like so technologically not there. Word seems to work and other people seem to be able to receive the document and edit in it. So why mess with a good thing?
I use Word too. I've thought about Scrivener, but I think there are I like my notebooks. So I think a lot of the features on Scrivener would be wasted on me. So I just keep it simple and stick to Word.
I'm a Word person too. I have a lot of friends who are on Scrivener, like maybe more than on Word, and they're trying to convert me to it. But I guess I'm too scared to just sort of jump into it without, having experienced it too much. I played around with it when I first downloaded it, and I was like, oh, this is too much for me.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
So Siri has answered. That's her answer.
Oh my God. That's a sign that you need to try Scrivener again.
Yeah. She's not sure she understands my so I have a talking to with Siri later, but I just, it's just sort of not the best time for me yet to kind of jump into this newer, this other platform, I should say. It's not newer, but I think eventually I'll probably make it over just to try like one project with it. It's just that I've never like in the right state of mind to start something completely new with a new platform.
I work in Word too. I think for me, like, I like writing linearly. I want to start at the beginning and go to the end. And so Scrivener, from what I've seen, seems like it is really, really cool for people who like to jump around in a book and write different pieces and rearrange different pieces and everything. My dog is back. But I just scroll to the bottom of the document and that works well for me.
I think this is also an interesting question, and I think I myself wonder this too very often. How do you nail writing about different professions, and what are the key points in your mind while you do that research?
Well,
Different
the cool thing,
professions?
yeah, the cool thing is teenagers don't have professions. So I don't have much experience with that. Meredith in the Summer of Broken Rules works at her town's local bagel shop, which I have plenty of experience with. But yeah, I'm gonna pass.
A very quick segue, Robin, if you have your answer.
I mean, I try and think about what would probably suit the story. And then I just, again, go down that research rabbit hole. I don't want to go too far out of my knowledge zone where it becomes like really apparent. Like I'm not going to write about somebody who's like a major Wall Street banker with an intricate knowledge of finance and all this stuff that I just simply don't have. Because there's always going to be that one person that's going to make a point of pointing that out in really big detail. And so, I don't know, I think I tend to find professions that suit the characters, that are easily researchable, easily relatable for the most part, or funny. And so, you know, something that can add a dimension, like the character Jack in Where the Road Leads Us. His mother is a celebrity sex therapist. So it's just automatically, it's funny, even though you don't need to get into the details of what she does. You're already thinking, okay, that's pretty funny, you know, but it's like, you know, it could be just, you know, they work at the supermarket, just, you know, regular basic jobs. They're not launched into careers yet. So that's me.
Most of my YA characters have summer jobs or have jobs after school. So I have based some of that based on either real work experience, or I do just a little bit of research. But I do write adult as well. And for those books, I go deep, do deep dives, because what I don't want is somebody to say that they dismiss the book and the character and what she goes through because it's not realistic or something like that. So I bent down to grab this one. This is the research I did for my gamer book, because I did not have, I play games, but I do not actually know too much about the industry. I did interviews and I did focus groups, things like that, to really understand the industry. Because again, I just didn't want that, that group of people to say like, you don't know, you've never been in the industry. I really got like secondhand, firsthand accounts on everything that I did. And then my current book that's coming out in August, it's about a Wall Street banker, actually. And then I had to interview female investment bankers. And so I have friends already in the industry, but I also made sure that I understood how deals work and what it would be like if somebody was trying to acquire a business. I made sure I had all of that be accurate, so that I didn't incorporate all of it, but I wanted to make sure I had that background so that when I did write it, it was realistic.
I also, write about teenagers. They don't have jobs. When I was 15, I didn't understand what any of my parents' friends or my parents did. So similar to Suzanne, I'll use, either my own experience or my friends' experiences about summer jobs for teenagers. And I think when I'm trying to figure out, when I'm trying to do research, I think I just never look at only one source or talk to only one person, because everyone has their own biases and little quirks to their experience and the ways they see it differently from someone else. So I just try to get a whole bunch of sources when I do have to research something.
Perfect. And that was the last question, y'all. We are a little bit over time, but honestly, we had some great questions, so we just had to go a little bit past. But thank you to everyone that submitted a question, and I hope that the answers were just incredible and just filling you with a lot of inspiration to now go back home. I mean, probably you guys are already home, but just open the computer, open a Word, and just start drafting your own thing and embarking on your own journey. So